On the broadcast tonight, 2 weeks ago on this Wednesday, a ferry carrying hundreds of passengers sank off Korea's southwestern coast. Today, divers continue to battle strong currents in murky waters to search for the missing. The Sewol-ho ferry disaster has brought into question the nation's safety standards and highlighted loopholes in its disaster management system. We speak to an expert. And Pyongyang is not prepared to carry out a fourth nuclear test, says a U.S. expert, although it seems that the reclusive state is weighing up the diplomatic and economic consequences. This is Early Edition at 6. It is 5 a.m. in New York, 11 in Geneva, and 6 on a Wednesday evening here in Seoul. This is Early Edition at 6, live from Seoul. I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you for joining us for the newscast.
Two weeks have passed since the tragic Sewol-ho ferry disaster put the entire nation in a state of shock, sorrow, and frustration. The number of confirmed dead stands at 212, and 90 people still remain unaccounted for.
For a look at the latest developments on the search and rescue front and the ongoing investigation, our Kwon Soa joins us live from the News Center. So, Soa, what's the latest?
Well, a couple of hours ago, 2 more bodies were recovered, one apparently being that from a male student on the 4th floor of the ship and the other of a female student around 1 kilometer away from the accident site. Earlier this Wednesday, 5 bodies were recovered at around 3 a.m. on the left side of the 4th floor and in the lobby on the 5th floor. Although the weather conditions are favorable with clear skies, divers are still encountering problems due to high tides and fast currents. The search operations are being halted periodically, but rescue crews will do what they can to gain better access inside the ferry. At around 9 this evening, the tides will be at their calmest for the last time this Wednesday.
Well, let's hope that this crucial time window brings about results. Now, so can you give us more details on how the operations are unfolding today?
Sure, Kwon-young. The Navy, Maritime Police, and civilian divers will continue with the search today, focusing on the 4th floor, where initially most of the missing were thought to be, but also on the 5th floor lobby, where many of the recently retrieved bodies were located. The commander of the recovery operation thinks the bodies found in the lobby were of students who had been on the 4th floor.
As the water started coming in, the students probably instinctively rushed to the upper floor.
The students most likely tried to make their way up the stairs to the 5th floor to get onto the deck of the ship, but unfortunately they were not able to get out. Meanwhile, a diving bell, which would allow divers to stay underwater for longer periods of time, could not be deployed earlier in the day due to the rough water conditions, but further tries will be made.
So, what are the latest developments regarding the probe and also the criminal charges against those associated with the accident?
Sean, a very shocking revelation was made a little bit ago regarding rescue operations in the early days of the Sewol-ho ferry sinking. A lawmaker of the Parliamentary Defense Committee said, according to a report by the Defense Ministry, the Maritime Police restricted the Navy from getting close to the accident site and claimed Undin, a private rescue operation company, should dive first. The company was hired by the operator of the sunken ferry, Cheongjin Marine. Now, in the meantime, meantime, a special investigation team is speeding up its probes, especially regarding the practical owner of the ferry operator, Yu Byung-on. One of 7 key figures linked to Yu, the CEO of the cosmetics company Tapanda, named Song Guk-bin, was questioned at the Incheon District Prosecutor's Office this morning on suspicion of corruption. As for the Yu family, prosecutors are going to first summon the members currently in the country, which includes Yu's children. Meanwhile, the latest investigation reveals that the Sewol-ho ferry had been put on sale a month before the accident. It was being sold for an amount that would have resulted in financial losses of roughly $5.8 million. Investigators are trying to figure out why.
Well, it seems like the prosecution is expanding their investigations onto various fronts, so we cannot expect immediate results. But what about these students that survived and were hospitalized after the accident? Now, they were allowed to go home today. How are they doing?
Yes, Kanyang, that's right. Out of the 88 patients from the Sewol-ho ferry accident that were hospitalized at Korea University Ansan Hospital, 74 were Danwon High School students and 70 were discharged this Wednesday after lunchtime. Doctors said in a briefing earlier that their conditions had improved considerably.
It's been determined that most of the students don't have any symptoms that could trigger dangerous after effects in the near future.
Many had shown signs of post-traumatic stress following the accident. The president of the hospital said the students should not be exposed to any news on the Sewol-ho or anything else that might remind them of that tragic day. On the request of the students, they went to the group memorial altar in Ansan to say their goodbyes to their fellow classmates and teachers who did not survive. Now that's all I have for now, but I'll be back with more updates in our further newscast.
Well, 2 weeks in, and there's still more questions than answers about this Sewol-ho ferry tragedy that has left more than 300 people either dead or missing.
To get to some of the answers, the Board of Audit and Inspection has launched an investigation into 4 government agencies to determine what they did and didn't do that may have contributed to the disaster. Arirang News' Ji Myung-gil has more.
The state auditor has launched a preliminary probe into 4 government agencies that have played key roles in the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. On Tuesday, the Board of Audit and Inspection began looking into the Maritime Ministry, the Ministry of Security and Public Administration, the Korea Coast Guard, and the Korea Maritime and Port Administration. Auditors will be looking into whether the agencies took appropriate measures in dealing with Korea's worst maritime disaster in decades. The preliminary inspection will look into how the agencies managed the safety inspections of ships. It will also review points made by experts and the media about the government response. Although the preliminary probe is supposed to mainly include a review of documents and by the agencies being inspected, the audit board has also dispatched officials to collect additional information. The move is a prelude to an intensive audit planned for next month on the 4 agencies and their handling of the Sewol-ho disaster. To more effectively deal with future crises, President Park Geun-hye announced Tuesday that a new safety ministry will be launched under the purview of the Prime Minister's office. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Well, the Sewol-ho ferry disaster has exposed Korea's safety shortcomings. An investigation into the factors behind the catastrophe has already made plain that they go far beyond individual errors. They point to a need for broad reforms of this country's safety regulations and disaster management.
For a closer look into this issue, we're joined live in the studio by Ha Kyu-man. He's a certified emergency manager both in Korea and in the United States. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, first, let's begin with the poor initial response to this ferry disaster, which of course led the nation's prime minister to resign as well. What is your assessment of the response that you saw in the early stages of this ferry disaster?
I want to talk about manual. Particularly, we have so many number of manuals on each emergency management. The exact number of manual is about 3,400. It's a huge number, as you see. So it means that each section of government has its own manual on emergency management. However, I want to talk about the content of manual as well. Because based on my experience, it has not been easy for me to follow the content of a manual, mainly because those who wrote these manuals, they didn't know the meaning of key principles on emergency management. So they failed to reflect those key principles to the content of manuals. So no wonder why it's so difficult to understand.
So instead of these manuals, people are advocating a control tower. Do you think that it should move more towards people, like there should be more of a chain of command to have a group or a ministry that's in charge of all of the disaster-related responses?
I think both. I mean, because this is Korea, this is a Confucius nation, so usually we emphasize the function of command and control. However, in terms of emergency management, it requires all stakeholders' efforts. So we need not only a command and control, but also coordination and cooperation as well. So.
Right, so coordination and cooperation. Now let's turn our attention to the disaster and crisis management in other countries. How do they compare with Korea?
I want to talk about American case. The United States has the whole picture over emergency management, which is called NRF. It means that National Response Framework. So in short, USA has National Response Framework. It means that each stakeholder, such as government, business, volunteer, and community, their role and responsibility have been identified and decided already before the outbreak of disaster. So once disaster happens, each one they follow their role and responsibility. So I mean, pretty much planned scenario, I think.
So the president has asked for a reform of our national safety responses and measures from the square one. Do you think we need to overhaul the entire system?
Oh, definitely, because the biggest problem to me is that Korea doesn't have an American version of a national response framework. Some say that maybe the basic plan on national safety management is very similar to the states of the American national response framework, but that's not true. I mean, the basic plan is just plan, but American NRF is sort of a framework, so totally different. So we have to set up new national response framework.
So what is it that, because you're a certified emergency manager, now as a certified emergency manager, what kind of a service do you provide? Is it private or do you work with governments as well?
Both. I mean, emergency manager play a role in many, particularly in coordinating thorny issues on the disaster spot. So I mean, sometimes I can work with a private company, but many times I have to work for government, mainly because emergency management is a sort of a public good.
So do you think that there was a conflict between different departments of our government that really delayed the initial response?
Oh, definitely. One of the most serious problem in the field of emergency management is to coordinate thorny issues from different departments, different people. As you see, so many different people come to a disaster spot, so it's never easy to coordinate those different opinions. Based on my experience, coordination efforts was one of the most difficult ones to achieve.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to learn a lesson from this disaster and establish a framework for this country as well. All right, Dr. Hagiman, thank you so much for speaking with us this evening.
You're welcome.
Now, there isn't a single person in this country who hasn't been touched by the tragic sinking of the Sewol-ho ferry, and that has translated into an outpour of sympathy for the victims' families.
But they had a message for the public on this Wednesday. Stop feeling sorry for us. Park Ji-won tells us why.
Despite their sorrow, anger, and fatigue, the people representing the families of the Sewol-ho ferry student victims are reaching out to the Korean people who are also grief-stricken by the national tragedy.
Please stop feeling sorry for us. It's us who were unable to protect our own children.
The families have refused to receive direct donations from citizens.
성금을 하신다면
If you have to donate, we have decided we will deposit all the money into a scholarship fund.
However, the families of the victims strongly criticize the government for failing to save student lives because of a faulty rescue system. They said they will hold the government and shipping company accountable for the disaster. The families also called on the government to get to the bottom of the accident to uncover the details about how and why it happened. Lastly, the families asked related agencies and citizens to support the families of those still unaccounted for, who are still desperately waiting their loved ones to return. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
A day after North Korea fired off 50 heavy artillery shells just north of its maritime border with South Korea, the United States has spoken out. It's calling on Pyongyang to stop its string of provocations. Now, the next one, however, could come in the form of a nuclear test, and as our Kim Hyun-bin tells us, some experts believe that even though a fourth nuclear test is highly likely, it probably is not imminent.
The press secretary of the Pentagon, John Kirby, called on North Korea on Tuesday to stop its provocations that are stirring up tensions on the Korean peninsula. Kirby's comments came in response to North Korea's live fire drill near the de facto maritime border with South Korea in the West Sea on Tuesday, during which 50 heavy artillery shells were fired. It was the latest in a string of provocative acts from the north of the border. The larger question, though, is what's next? The speculation is that the North will conduct a fourth nuclear test in the near future, but determining when is another story. Despite thorough analysis of several commercial satellite images, Joel Witt, a senior fellow with the U.S.-Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University, said it's hard to predict. While Witt said that there are currently no signs that a test is imminent, he added that North Korea is almost certain to carry out a test at some point. Some experts believe that North Korea will conduct its nuclear test during the U.S. midterm elections in November.
At this moment, North Korea's fourth nuclear test is not imminent. It's obvious. But the problem is the fourth nuclear test may be reserved on holding mode for the time being to select a symbolic timing, considering changing political landscape in the region, including the United States mid-election and the other neighboring countries' political situation.
While we wait, the North Korean regime continues to talk up its nuclear program. The regime on Tuesday condemned U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Northeast Asia and said it would strengthen its nuclear deterrent. The North's National Defense Commission said it has the capacity to carry out something bigger than a boost-efficient nuclear weapon test or a new intercontinental ballistic missile launch, and that the regime would not dismantle the program under any circumstances. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the dire human rights situation in North Korea will be in the spotlight at the UN Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday. Finding ways to persuade the North to improve the way it treats its people will be the focus of the Universal Periodic Review. The review studies the human rights situations in all UN member countries every 4 years, and the North is a repeat offender. In a written report submitted to the UN ahead of the review, North Korea said it was making efforts to address its problems through laws to protect the underprivileged. After the review is over, the UN Human Rights Council will adopt a summary along with recommendations for the regime. Now, if you're not already familiar with the Internet of Things, it won't be long until you are. IT research firm Gartner says revenue generated by hardware and service providers in this sector will top $300 billion in 2020. But why look so far ahead? Koreans have already started to integrate the concept into their daily lives, and our Na Hyung-kyung reports there's much more to come.
Connecting physical objects through the internet and creating new information and business models. It's called the Internet of Things. Here's an example. Footage is recorded through numerous surveillance cameras on expressways and data is collected. But instead of simply having the two pieces of information relayed, the internet is used to help connect the two and provide authorities better control of the traffic system. And there will be many more examples to list in the future, with the concept evolving into what's called the Internet of Everything.
Some of the key things that are evident today is that there will be massive improvements in terms of efficiency. For example, using energy usage to make the planet more green. Also improvements in agriculture, making of food and so forth, where we keep track of rainfall, appropriate fertilization and so forth, to maximally use our agricultural capacity given climate change and everything else.
For that, internet connectivity and the availability of wireless and cellular networks are critical. And it doesn't hurt that Korea has a state-of-the-art mobile network system. But even with advanced internet connectivity, there are still many more hurdles that not only Korea but the global markets need to overcome before this concept becomes a full part of our daily lives.
The format in which data is sent to networks is not standardized. People will feel the actual effects. Only if related businesses can agree on a standardized protocol for developing technologies and devices.
The Korean government plans to inject $50 million into fostering the Internet of Things market in 2014. Although experts say it will take years, if not generations, for the Internet of Everything to be fully commercialized globally, they also agree that the market for the Internet of Things in Korea is very close to being realized. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
And shifting gears to some economic news, new output data confirms that most industry sectors in Korea performed better in March from the previous month. There are also signs that domestic demand is finally beginning to grow. Our Hwang Jae reports on the size of relief.
Korea's industrial output last month dismissed worries that the nation's economy might not be recovering as many had hoped. Statistics Korea said Wednesday the output rose across all industries except for the construction sector in March. Production in the mining, manufacturing, and gas industries rose 0.9% last month from February, following 2 straight months of decline. The agency said the gain was led by strong exports of automobiles and semiconductors. More importantly, retail sales and the service industry rebounded, stoking hopes that lackluster domestic demand is finally picking up. Retail sales went up more than 1.5% last month, while service sector production also edged up 0.1%. Further brightening the economic outlook, facilities investment also bounced back, confirming that businesses expect growing demand in coming months. Although the central bank has cautioned that the sunken Sewol-ho ferry disaster might hurt consumer sentiment, Nomura Securities believes the disaster will have a limited impact on the economy. The Japanese brokerage firm said private spending could drop in April but will likely recover soon. It also kept its growth forecast for Asia's 4th largest economy for this year unchanged at 4%. The nation's overall industrial output rose slightly by 0.4% in March after a 1.3% fall in the previous month. Hwang Jae, Arirang News.
The government is putting its foot down over massive debt and excessive benefits at public organizations. New reform measures order wide-scale changes with specific goals that must be reached. If they aren't, the CEOs of those organizations could find themselves out of a job. Song Ji-sun has more.
Public organizations in Korea have long been criticized for their ballooning debts and excessive employee benefits, and the government is determined to end such practices. They finalized a plan to sell off their non-core assets, slash exorbitant benefits, and streamline the overall business structure. As the first step to overhaul nearly 300 public institutions, The finance minister has ordered them to reduce their debt by some $50 billion over the coming years. Their goal is to lower the combined debt level of these organizations to 187% by 2017, down 34 percentage points from 2012. The government will conduct an interim evaluation of their debt reduction efforts in the second half of this year. If the organization's progress is deemed unsatisfactory, their CEOs could be replaced and the salaries of their employees frozen. Welfare benefits for employees could also be axed. Welfare spending at the institutions will be slashed by an average of $700 per person a year, down a quarter from last year. The measures are part of a 3-year economic innovation plan announced by President Park Geun-hye in February to normalize the public sector. 송지선, Arirang News.
Well, the weather conditions have improved in Jindo, where search efforts on the Sewol-ho ferry continue.
Let's turn to our Michelle Park for more. Michelle.
Well, the visibility-wise, the skies were very clear off Korea's southwestern coast today. However, the currents are still very strong due to the spring tides. Now, tomorrow we can expect similar conditions with sunny skies, but the fast tides will remain until tomorrow, which will make things more difficult for the search divers. Now, since we're now in a spring tide period, when currents are stronger than normal, times at which tides slow down are all that much more important, and tomorrow there will be 4 times in which the tides will be calm, with the first one coming at 3:18 in the morning. Now, for the rest of the nation, we can expect improved weather conditions for tomorrow. Now, also it's going to be mostly sunny with highs of up to low to mid 20s. Now, going over to our readings. Seoul tops out at 12 in the morning before reaching up to 23. Now, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak up to 24 and 21 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 20, Dokdo at 17, while Mankumgang tops out at 18. Well, that's all I have for you tonight. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
That brings us to the end of the newscast. Thank you for watching. For our viewers in Korea, have a wonderful rest of the evening.
And a great start of the day to those of you in other parts of the world.
This has been Sean Lim.
And I'm Moon Gun-young. We hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.